The Football World Cup's the biggest sporting event in the world, and you can keep up with the play with me, Jason Piney, and my good mate and former All-White David Choate on Football Fever. Listen daily throughout the World Cup as we bring you all the action from Qatar. Choate and I love football. We can't wait for the World Cup to get underway. So join us as we live through all the goals, all the drama, all the glory. Download Football Fever from iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts.
Tom Glover is bleeding. He's been hit with one of the bins that they put the flares out in. And these scenes are just everything we did not want to see.
Yeah, frightening stuff after a pitch invasion at Melbourne's Amy Park last night, seeing the Melbourne A-League derby between Melbourne City and Melbourne Victory abandoned after 20 minutes due to player safety issues. Melbourne City goalkeeper Tom Glover, referee Alex King and a TV cameraman all injured. Tom Glover was hit by a metal bucket. What happened was that flares started to be thrown onto the pitch and the metal buckets, plural, were there, I think in readiness for the possibility of flares being thrown onto the pitch. And so the buckets were there with sand in them so that I guess the ground staff or the security staff, whoever it was, the stewards, could grab the flares, put them in the metal buckets and snuff them out. But when all these flares were being thrown onto the pitch, Tom Glover, the Melbourne City goalkeeper, picked up a couple of them and threw them back behind his goal. One of them landed just over the advertising hoardings. Another one, though, landed in the crowd. And that seemed to be the catalyst for the pitch invasion. It doesn't excuse it, obviously it doesn't, but that seems to be what happened. The players left the field and the match was abandoned around 40 minutes later. A full Football Australia investigation is underway. The voice you heard in that footage was commentator Robbie Thomson, who joins us now from across the ditch. Robbie, you went along to Amy Park last night, fully expecting to call a football match, as you do so very well every week, but instead this happened. How do you reflect on the events of last night?
I think everyone's still in a bit of shock, really. I mean, they're shocking scenes. Unfortunately, it's not the first time in commentating football. I have been on air for an hour on my own doing French football when there have been similar scenes. But you don't expect to see it. You never plan to see it. And honestly, it's the furthest thing from your mind, and it's just gut-wrenching. I mean, to see this was so bad because of the violence involved. I mean, a pitch invasion is already bad enough. Throwing flares is bad, but to attack, and it was an attack, assault on players and officials. I mean, it's just going next level, and I can't think of seeing anything like that in Australian sport. I think it's a line that no one wanted to cross, or I mean. It's just crazy. It was crazy, and I think there's a lot of unpacking to be done. There's a lot of analysis, and we have to find out why this happened, how it happened, why it was allowed to happen. There are so many questions that this begs because the game is in a perilous state at the moment.
Did you get any sense that something like this might happen in the first 20 minutes of the game?
There was a tension in the air, but again, that's fine. This is a Melbourne derby. You want that sporting tension. There are lines. You can have. I don't mind a little bit of aggression in the air, a little bit of intimidation from fans who are supporting their club. But there was a little bit of something a little bit menacing in the air, particularly in the minutes leading up to it. I think everyone was anticipating it. Everyone was wondering what was going to happen. And to tell you the truth, Jason, we had a phone call. We had a phone call about an hour before kickoff saying, look, in any eventualities, this is how we're going to try and deal with it. And unfortunately, it went beyond all worst case scenarios that we thought, what are we going to show? How are we going to address it? What do we talk about? And in the end, it was just an open wound. And I felt, there was no filters. It was just brutal. It was shocking, and we couldn't have prepared for what happened.
I've seen it suggested in some quarters that Melbourne City goalkeeper Tom Glover, who was the one who was assaulted with the steel bin thrown in his direction, was partly to blame because he threw one of the flares that had been thrown onto the pitch back into the stands. Does that theory hold any water with you?
There were incidents, and there's a series of incidents that meant we arrived at the point we did. When I saw Tom do that, I thought, oh no. And because I've seen that before in European football, I saw it 2 seasons ago when Dimitri Payet for Marseille threw a water bottle back into the Nice supporters, and the exact same reaction. But there'd already been a cameraman hit by a flare thrown from the back of the stand that flew down, and fortunately that cameraman is okay. There were already some supporters on the pitch, and Tom Glover had already thrown one flare just over the advertising hoardings. But I think, and I'm not going to condemn Tom Glover, who was dodging flares down on when he's there to play a football match. But I think that was ill-advised. You can't throw. I mean, you have to be above it. You can't throw that back. And I think he was frustrated. He was upset. And I'm not saying that he was the spark that provoked it all. But you can't. We don't want anyone throwing flares, including players either.
Robbie, how do you expect Football Australia and the APL, who run the A-Leagues, to respond? Again,
going from precedents that I've experienced overseas, and again, it will be analysed and find out who is guilty of what and planning. Hopefully, the APL will learn an awful lot. The commissioners, the match organisation. Hopefully, this is an important step into ensuring that it never happens again and that nothing like this happens again. We need to anticipate what can happen. We need to be ready for every worst-case scenario, which clearly the organisation was not. This was a Melbourne City home game, even if it's in a stadium that is shared with Melbourne Victory. They were clearly in the Melbourne Victory supporters' end in their active support, so I think there's no doubt the club has to take some responsibility. But whether Melbourne Victory are responsible for the organisation and security at this fixture, I'm not sure that that's the case. But look, the APL have to look at it from their perspective, that this is terrible for the game, for their product in this country and in New Zealand. And then Melbourne Victory have to be sanctioned. They're their supporters. They will, we could be talking about points reductions. We could be talking about no away fans. We could be talking about no home fans in the entire stadium. That will be a financial hit to the club. And we've already seen over this week, which has been an awful week for football in Australia, that the finances are not in the healthiest state. So, look, they're going to have to play behind closed doors, I imagine. They're going to be without active support. I think we have to have a strong look at that active support group. And again, I stress that there will be sanctions against them, but this is not all the Melbourne Victory fans. They are the best supported club in the country. They have fantastic supporters. They have fantastic atmosphere at their matches. And unfortunately, this is the action of a few, and probably, how many do you think, Jason, were on the pitch? 100 people out of 15?
At most, Robbie. At most.
So 80 to 100 lunatics running onto the pitch, running amok, assaulting players. I mean, the game is bigger than all of this. We don't have to be all angsty and pulling our hair out and saying, oh my God, where does the game go from here? Where does the game go from here? It's very clear. These are criminal charges brought against those that assaulted people. Those that invaded a pitch are not welcome back, because you can't do that. You sign a charter when you of good behaviour when you walk into a football stadium. That has not been respected. The game will survive all of this. Melbourne Victory will survive all of this. The A-League will survive all of this. But you have to be strong in your leadership and in your condemnation of these actions, which are not acceptable. They're not, just because we're football and we think we have active support and we have all of this. This is not acceptable. This has crossed so many lines, and not just crossed them, jumped over so many lines, and we have to be strong. It's not a question of defending football against this or that or this or that. This is to be condemned. These people are to be punished. The club is to be sanctioned, and that's it. And we will move on. We learn from mistakes and we move on. But football will survive. Of course, it will survive. And the game, the first 20 minutes of the football match were superb. The Socceroos were superb. New Zealand would have been fantastic if they could have qualified for the World Cup. It was, they've got a great team. Football will survive. The future is always bright because this is the biggest sport in the world. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, even if we're shocked by what we saw last night.
Robbie, great to get the chance to chat. Just before you go, I thought you handled an incredibly difficult situation extraordinarily well last night. As I said, you turned up to call a football match, as you do so well every week, and then had to talk us all through that. So massive rap to you for the way you handled it. And again, thanks for joining us across New Zealand today.
I appreciate that, Piney. Anytime.